My name is Maren Holt, and this is the story of how a CEO tried to erase me from my own creation, until a stack of patent documents proved him wrong in the most spectacular way possible. At 33, I'd spent a decade building mobile applications that people actually wanted to use. Not the forgettable kind that cluttered app stores, but the ones that solved real problems with elegant interfaces and bulletproof backend systems. I'd worked for agencies, consulted for Fortune 500 companies, and even had a brief stint at a gaming studio where I learned that crunch culture wasn't for me. What I wanted was to build something meaningful, something that would make a genuine difference in how people managed their daily lives. That desire led me to Cascade Technologies on a humid morning in late April. The company operated out of a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, one of those deliberately hip spaces with exposed ductwork, reclaimed wood everywhere, and enough plants to qualify as an indoor jungle. Cascade occupied 3 floors, and from the moment I stepped into the reception area, I could feel the energy. Developers hunched over standing desks, product managers gesturing at whiteboards covered in user flow diagrams, and the constant hum of a company that believed it was building the future. I'd been recruited by Elliot Shaw, Cascade's head of product, whom I'd met at a mobile development conference in San Francisco the previous fall. We'd bonded over our mutual frustration with productivity apps that promised everything and delivered confusion. Maren, he'd said over drinks after his panel discussion, we're building something different. Not another to-do list app or calendar replacement, but a genuinely intelligent assistant that learns how you work and adapts to your needs. We need someone who understands both the technical architecture and the user psychology. The pitch was compelling. Cascade wanted to create an app called Momentum, a productivity platform that used machine learning to predict your work patterns, automatically prioritize tasks based on context and energy levels, and integrate seamlessly with every tool in your digital life. The vision was ambitious, maybe impossibly so, but that's what attracted me. I was tired of building incremental improvements to existing concepts. I wanted to create something genuinely new. Daniel Mercer swept into the product team meeting on my 3rd day, and I understood immediately why people either loved or feared him. At 37, he had the kind of presence that filled a room, tall, perpetually tanned, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that looked calculated rather than natural. He wore expensive casual clothes, the kind where a plain t-shirt costs $300 because of the label inside. "Team," he announced, clapping his hands together with performative enthusiasm, "I want you to meet Maren Holt. Elliot's been telling me she's going to solve all our architectural challenges and make Momentum the smartest productivity app on the planet." I offered a hand, which he gripped with the kind of aggressive firmness that always felt like a power play. "I'm looking forward to diving into the technical challenges," I said simply. "Technical challenges." Daniel smiled, but his eyes stayed calculating. "That's exactly what we need. Someone who sees obstacles as opportunities. The market's waiting for us, Maren. We just need to execute on the vision." The vision, as it turned out, was more Daniel's than anyone else's. Over the following weeks, I learned that Cascade had been struggling for nearly 2 years to build Momentum. They'd gone through 3 technical leads before me, each one burning out or getting pushed aside when their implementations didn't match Daniel's ambitious promises to investors. The codebase was an archaeological dig of abandoned approaches, half-finished machine learning models, API integrations that led nowhere, and user interface components built on frameworks that were already deprecated. My first month was spent just understanding what actually worked versus what merely looked impressive in demos. Elliot was invaluable during this process, patiently walking me through the company's history and the technical decisions that had led to the current mess. "The core problem," he explained one evening as we reviewed the architecture diagrams, "is that nobody's figured out how to make the predictive engine actually smart. We can collect data about user behavior, sure, but turning that into genuinely useful predictions? That's where every previous attempt has failed." I'd been thinking about this problem constantly, even dreaming about it. The challenge wasn't just technical, it was conceptual. Current productivity apps treated all tasks as basically equivalent, differentiated only by due dates and user-assigned priorities. But real work didn't function that way. Some tasks required deep focus and were best tackled when your energy was high. Others were administrative busywork perfect for low-energy moments. Some had hidden dependencies that made their apparent due dates misleading. What we needed was a system that understood context, not just the task itself, but when and how it should be completed based on dozens of factors. Time of day, recent work patterns, energy levels inferred from activity data, even external factors like upcoming meetings or deadlines. The breakthrough came on a Saturday afternoon in my apartment, surrounded by whiteboards covered in algorithms and half-eaten takeout containers. I was working on what I called contextual priority mapping, an approach that treated task management as a multidimensional optimization problem rather than a simple ordered list. The algorithm I developed analyzed tasks across 7 different vectors: urgency, complexity, energy requirement, dependency chains, context switching, costs, deadline flexibility, and what I called completion satisfaction, the psychological boost from finishing different types of work. By processing all these factors through a neural network that learned individual work patterns, the system could predict not just what you should do next but when and how you should do it. I spent the entire weekend coding a proof of concept, barely sleeping, sustained by coffee and the electric thrill of watching something genuinely innovative take shape. By Monday morning, I had a working prototype that could analyze a week's worth of tasks and generate a dynamic schedule that adapted in real time as circumstances changed. Elliot was stunned when I demonstrated it. "Maren, this is incredible. This is what we've been trying to build for 2 years." "It needs refinement," I cautioned, though I couldn't suppress my excitement. The neural network requires more training data, and the user interface for displaying recommendations needs work, but the core algorithm is solid. "Show Daniel," Elliot urged. "This is exactly the kind of breakthrough we need to show investors." The demonstration for Daniel happened that afternoon in the main conference room. I'd prepared carefully, creating sample data sets and scenarios that would highlight the system's capabilities. Daniel brought his entire executive team: Chief Operating Officer, Head of Design, and the VP of Engineering, a nervous man named Trevor who always seemed afraid of saying the wrong thing. I walked them through the algorithm step by step, explaining how contextual priority mapping worked and demonstrating the system's ability to predict optimal work patterns. Daniel watched intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed he understood just enough to be dangerous. "So the AI learns my work style and tells me what to do?" he asked. "Not exactly," I corrected. "It learns patterns in your work behavior and uses that to generate recommendations. The user always has control. The system suggests, it doesn't dictate." Right. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "But from a user's perspective, the app is basically thinking for them, taking all the cognitive load out of planning their day." "That's one way to frame it," I agreed cautiously. Daniel stood up, pacing the way he did when he was excited. "This is it. This is the differentiation we need. Every other productivity app is just a fancy list. We're building an actual intelligent assistant. Trevor, how long to integrate this into the main app?" Trevor glanced at me nervously. "That depends on how robust Maren's code is and how much." 2 weeks, Daniel interrupted. "I want this in beta within 2 weeks. We have investor presentations coming up, and this is the wow factor we've been missing." The next 2 weeks were brutal. Integrating my prototype into Cascade's existing codebase required rebuilding significant portions of the app's architecture. The database schema needed restructuring to handle the multidimensional task data. The API layer required new endpoints for real-time priority updates. The mobile interface had to be completely redesigned to surface the system's recommendations without overwhelming users. I worked 16-hour days, often staying at the office until midnight and returning by 7 the next morning. Trevor occasionally offered help, but his contributions were minimal. Mostly code reviews that nitpicked minor style issues while missing substantive problems. Elliot was more useful, helping design the user experience and running interference with Daniel when the CEO's demands became unrealistic. The demo for investors happened on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel had arranged for Cascade's 3 major venture capital backers to visit: Redwood Capital, Forge Ventures, and Lighthouse Partners. These were the firms that had poured $15 million into Cascade based on Daniel's vision and promises of revolutionary technology. I'd prepared extensively, creating polished demonstration scenarios and anticipating every possible question. But when the investors arrived, Daniel pulled me aside. "Maren, let me handle the presentation. You can jump in if there are technical questions, but I need to control the narrative." Something about his tone bothered me, but I was too exhausted to argue. "Sure, you know your investors better than I do." The presentation was masterful, I had to admit. Daniel positioned Momentum as the inevitable evolution of productivity software, painting a picture of a future where everyone had a personalized AI assistant managing their professional lives. He demonstrated my algorithm flawlessly, walking through scenarios and showing how the system adapted to changing circumstances. But what struck me was his language. Everything was "we developed," and "our innovation," and "the technology we've created." Not once did he mention my name or acknowledge that the breakthrough had come from a specific person. To hear Daniel tell it, this revolutionary algorithm had emerged organically from Cascade's team of brilliant engineers working collaboratively toward a shared vision. The investors ate it up. They asked probing questions about scalability, data privacy, and competitive advantages, all of which Daniel handled smoothly. When one investor asked about the technical team behind the innovation, Daniel gestured vaguely toward Trevor. "We've assembled an exceptional engineering team. Trevor here leads our technical development, and we have some very talented individual contributors executing on the vision." Individual contributors. That's what I'd become in Daniel's narrative, an interchangeable part of the machine rather than the architect of its most important innovation. After the investors left, buzzing with excitement about Momentum's potential, Daniel gathered the team for a celebration. He ordered expensive champagne and gave a speech about how today marked the turning point for Cascade, the moment when we'd proven our technology could deliver on the promises he'd been making. "This is what happens when a great team comes together around a powerful vision," he concluded, raising his glass. "Everyone here should be proud. You're building something that's going to change how millions of people work." I drank the champagne and accepted congratulations from colleagues, but a cold awareness had settled in my gut. Daniel wasn't just taking credit for my work. He was systematically erasing me from the story of its creation. That night, I called my older brother Felix, who practiced intellectual property law at a mid-sized firm in Seattle. We'd always been close despite the 3-year age gap, and he was one of the few people who understood both the technical and legal aspects of my work. "Felix, I need advice," I said without preamble. "Hypothetically, if someone develops a novel algorithm while employed by a startup who owns that innovation?" There was a pause. "Hypothetically." "Okay, not hypothetically. I built something significant at Cascade and I'm getting a weird vibe about credit and ownership." Felix sighed. "Did you sign an intellectual property assignment agreement when you joined?" "Of course. Standard employment contract." "Then legally, anything you create as part of your job duties belongs to the company. That's pretty much universal in tech." He paused. "But Marin, that's not quite what you're asking, is it? You're worried about something else." I explained the investor presentation, Daniel's careful erasure of my specific contributions, and the growing sense that I was being positioned as expendable now that the breakthrough had been achieved. "Here's what you need to do," Felix said seriously. "Document everything. Every design decision, every line of code, every email where you explain your approach. Forward copies to a personal email account. And Marin, this is important. If you developed any part of this algorithm on your own time, outside of work hours, using your own equipment, that changes the ownership calculus significantly." "How significantly?" "Potentially enough to matter. The standard employment IP clause covers work done as part of your job duties using company resources. But if you can prove you conceived of the core innovation independently before implementing it at Cascade, that's a different story." After we hung up, I spent the night reviewing my personal files. The truth was, I had developed the foundational concepts for contextual priority mapping months before joining Cascade. I had notebooks from the previous fall filled with early algorithms and conceptual frameworks. I'd even written a technical blog post about multidimensional task optimization the previous November, long before I'd ever heard of Momentum. The implementation at Cascade had built on these earlier ideas certainly, but the core innovation, the actual intellectual breakthrough, had happened on my own time, solving a problem I'd been thinking about for years. I started documenting everything with obsessive precision. I created a private GitHub repository and uploaded my original notebooks, blog posts, and early code experiments, all with timestamps that predated my employment at Cascade. I set up automated backups of my work email to a personal account. I began keeping detailed daily logs of my contributions, complete with code snippets and design decisions. If Daniel was planning to push me aside, I was going to make sure the record showed exactly what I'd built. The paranoia turned out to be justified. 2 months after the investor presentation, Daniel hired someone named Sophia Crane as VP of Product Innovation, a newly created role that effectively made her Elliot's boss and positioned her as the strategic mind behind Momentum's technical direction. Sophia had an impressive resume: Stanford MBA product leadership roles at 2 successful startups, and that special brand of confidence that came from never having actually built anything herself. She scheduled one-on-ones with every member of the product team, including me. We met in one of Cascade's smaller conference rooms, the kind with uncomfortable designer chairs and motivational slogans printed on the walls. "Marin," she began, smiling with rehearsed warmth, "I've been reviewing Momentum's technical architecture, and I'm really impressed with what the team has built. Daniel speaks highly of your contributions." "That's good to hear," I replied neutrally. "I wanted to discuss the roadmap going forward. We're planning significant expansion of Momentum's capabilities, and I want to make sure we're leveraging our engineering resources optimally." She pulled out a tablet displaying an organizational chart. "I'm thinking about restructuring the development team, creating more specialized roles. You'd focus on back-end optimization and performance, things you're clearly excellent at, while we bring in some additional expertise for the machine learning components." The message was clear. I was being moved away from the core innovation I'd created, relegated to maintenance work while others would build on the foundation I'd established. "The machine learning model is my design," I said carefully. "I understand its architecture better than anyone else here. Splitting that work doesn't make strategic sense." Sophia's smile never wavered. "I appreciate your passion, but as we scale, we need to think about knowledge distribution. Right now, too much institutional knowledge is concentrated in individual contributors. That creates risk. We need to democratize that expertise across the team." Democratize expertise. Another way of saying they wanted to extract my knowledge and make me replaceable. Over the following weeks, Sophia systematically dismantled my role. She hired 2 machine learning engineers, supposedly to support my work but really to learn everything I'd built. She instituted mandatory knowledge transfer sessions where I had to document every aspect of the contextual priority mapping algorithm. She even suggested I create video tutorials explaining my code so that anyone on the team could maintain it. Elliot tried to push back, but he had limited power in the new structure. "This is wrong," he told me privately. "Sophia and Daniel are deliberately minimizing your role, and I think they're planning something." "Planning what?" "I don't know exactly, but I've seen this pattern before. They're extracting your knowledge, and once they have it documented, you become expendable." I started spending more time with Felix, who was becoming increasingly concerned about what was happening. "You need to think strategically," he advised. "If they're planning to force you out, you need leverage. The question is, do you have any intellectual property claims that could survive the standard employment agreement?" "I think so," I said slowly. "The core algorithm, the foundational innovation, I developed that before joining Cascade. I can prove conception and reduction to practice using my blog posts, notebooks, and early code from last fall." Felix leaned forward intently. "That could be significant. In patent law, prior conception and reduction to practice can establish inventor rights even if later development happened at a company. But Marin, we're talking about potentially filing patent applications. That's expensive and time-consuming. What if I filed provisional patents? You've told me those are cheaper and establish a priority date." "That's true. Provisional applications give you 12 months to file a full utility patent while establishing your filing date. If you have documentation proving you conceived the innovation before joining Cascade, provisional patents could be very powerful." That weekend, I began drafting patent applications. The process was more complex than I'd anticipated, requiring precise legal language and detailed technical descriptions. Felix helped me navigate the requirements, and we ultimately prepared 3 provisional applications. The first covered systems and methods for multidimensional task prioritization using contextual analysis, the core algorithm that made Momentum work. The second described adaptive machine learning framework for personalized productivity optimization, the neural network architecture that learned individual work patterns. The third detailed real-time priority adjustment based on dynamic context factors, the system that updated recommendations as circumstances changed. Each application was carefully crafted to emphasize that the innovations built on my prior work, including extensive references to my blog posts, notebooks and code from before joining Cascade. Felix helped me structure the claims to maximize their defensive value while avoiding any direct copying of Cascade's implementation. Filing the applications cost nearly $5,000, money I really couldn't afford on my Cascade salary after Portland's ridiculous rent. But Felix convinced me it was essential insurance. These patents establish that you're the inventor of record for the core innovations, he explained. If Cascade tries to claim sole ownership of the technology, you'll have documentary evidence that the foundational concepts predated your employment there. That changes the legal landscape significantly. I filed all 3 provisional applications on a Saturday morning in October, using my personal address and marking myself as the sole inventor. The confirmation emails from the USPTO felt like small victories, tangible proof that I'd protected my work. The confrontation came 3 weeks later. Daniel called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon, with Sophia already seated in one of the designer chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The atmosphere was wrong immediately, too formal, too staged. "Marin, have a seat," Daniel said, gesturing to the empty chair. "We need to discuss your role at Cascade." I sat down slowly, my heart rate accelerating. "What about my role?" Sophia spoke first, her voice professionally sympathetic. "We've been evaluating team structure and technical needs, and we've made some difficult decisions. The machine learning engineers we hired have been ramping up well, and we feel confident they can handle ongoing development of Momentum's core systems." "Meaning?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was coming. Daniel took over, his expression practiced regret. "We're making some changes to the engineering team, including eliminating several positions. Unfortunately, your role is one of them." The words hung in the air for a moment. "You're firing me." "We prefer to think of it as organizational restructuring," Sophia said smoothly. "It's not a reflection on your contributions. You've done good work here, but the company's needs have evolved." I felt anger rising but forced my voice to stay level. "I built Momentum's core technology. The algorithm that impressed your investors? That was me. The machine learning framework? The entire contextual priority system? I designed and implemented all of it." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening slightly. "You were part of a team that built Momentum. Yes, you made contributions, but let's not overstate individual roles. Cascade's success comes from collaborative effort, not individual heroics." "That's revisionist history and you know it," I said, abandoning politeness. "I have emails, documentation, commit logs, everything showing exactly what I built." "All of which belongs to Cascade," Sophia interjected. "Under your employment agreement, any work you performed as an employee is company property. That includes code, designs, documentation, and anything else you created." Daniel pulled out a document. My employment contract with certain sections highlighted. "You signed this when you joined Marin. Paragraph 7 is very clear. Employee agrees that all inventions, discoveries, and improvements conceived or made by employee during employment, whether or not during working hours, shall be the sole property of the company." "That clause has exceptions," I said, thinking of the conversations with Felix. "Prior inventions, work done on personal time using personal resources." "None of which apply here," Daniel interrupted. "You developed Momentum's technology as part of your job duties, during work hours using company equipment. It's ours completely and unambiguously." Sophia slid another document across the desk. "We're offering a separation agreement. 4-week severance, continuation of health insurance through the end of the year, and a positive reference for future opportunities. In exchange, we need you to sign this confirming that all your work belongs to Cascade, that you won't disparage the company, and that you agree to a reasonable non-compete clause preventing you from working on similar technologies for 12 months. I scanned the document, my legal knowledge, augmented by months of discussions with Felix, helping me spot the landmines. The non-disparagement clause was overly broad. The non-compete would effectively prevent me from working in my field, and the IP confirmation would waive any potential claims I might have. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's your right, but the offer expires in 72 hours. If you don't sign by then, we'll terminate you without severance and with cause for insubordination and failure to properly document your work for team access." Insubordination. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Sophia has documented multiple instances where you resisted knowledge transfer efforts and failed to collaborate effectively with the new machine learning team, Daniel said, his tone hardening further. If this goes adversarial, we have a paper trail. I stood up, leaving the separation agreement on the desk. I'll have an answer for you in 72 hours. Felix's response when I called him from my car was immediate and forceful. Don't sign anything. That separation agreement is a trap designed to eliminate any leverage you might have. But if I don't sign, they'll fire me for cause and I'll have no severance at all. Let them try, Felix said grimly. We'll file a wrongful termination claim so fast their lawyers won't know what hit them. But more importantly, we need to act now. Do you have all your documentation backed up? Everything's in my personal repository and email. Good. Now listen carefully, we're going to do something aggressive. We're going to send a letter to Cascade's board of directors, not to Daniel or Sophia, but directly to the board. The letter will detail your contributions to Momentum and, most importantly, inform them that you hold provisional patents on the core technologies that make Momentum functional. Will that actually stop them? It'll make them think twice. Board members have fiduciary duties to shareholders. If they learn that the company's flagship product might infringe on patents held by an employee they're trying to push out, they'll demand answers. At minimum, it buys us negotiating time. We spent the next 2 days crafting the letter. Felix brought in a senior partner from his firm who specialized in patent litigation, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Donovan who reviewed my provisional applications and documentation with meticulous attention. This is solid, she concluded. Your blog posts and notebooks clearly establish prior conception of the core algorithms. The provisional patents establish your claim as inventor. And your employment contract's IP clause, while broad, doesn't explicitly cover inventions conceived before employment and developed partially on personal time. Partially on personal time? I asked. According to your logs, you did significant development work on weekends and evenings at home using your personal laptop. That matters. The fact that you later implemented these concepts at Cascade doesn't mean the company owns the underlying innovation. The letter went out on Friday morning, sent via certified mail to each of Cascade's 5 board members. It was professional but unambiguous. Dear board member, we are writing on behalf of Maren Holt regarding significant intellectual property concerns related to Cascade Technologies' Momentum application. Ms. Holt is the inventor of record for the core machine learning algorithms that enable Momentum's contextual priority mapping functionality. She has filed provisional patent applications with the USPTO covering these innovations, based on work she conceived and reduced to practice prior to her employment at Cascade. Ms. Holt has recently been informed of Cascade's intention to terminate her employment. Before any such action is taken, we believe the board should be aware that Momentum's core functionality may depend on patented technologies to which Ms. Holt holds inventor rights. We are prepared to discuss licensing arrangements that would allow Cascade to continue using these technologies while appropriately compensating the inventor. Please contact the undersigned to discuss this matter further. The response was faster than I'd expected. By Monday afternoon, I received a call from someone I'd never met. Lawrence Fletcher, Cascade's largest investor and board chair from Redwood Capital. Ms. Holt, he said without preamble, I've received your attorney's letter. These are serious allegations. They're not allegations, Mr. Fletcher. They're facts. I developed the innovations that make Momentum work and I have provisional patents establishing my claims. Daniel Mercer assures me that all technology developed at Cascade is company property under standard employment agreements. That's true for work developed as part of employment duties using company resources. But the foundational algorithms I created were conceived before I joined Cascade and developed partially on my own time. The employment IP clause doesn't cover prior inventions. There was a pause. I need to see your documentation. Can you provide evidence of this prior invention? I sent him everything. My blog posts from the previous fall explaining multidimensional task optimization, photographs of my original notebooks with dated entries, code from my personal GitHub repository showing early algorithm implementations, and the provisional patent applications with their USPTO filing confirmations. Fletcher called back 3 hours later. Ms. Holt, I think we need to talk. In person without Daniel or anyone else from Cascade management present. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? We met at a quiet coffee shop in Northwest Portland, far from Cascade's offices. Fletcher was older than I'd expected, probably in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that came from decades of evaluating technology companies. "I've reviewed your materials," he said, pulling out a tablet displaying my documents. "I've also had our technical advisors look at your blog posts and compare them to Momentum's architecture. The correlation is striking. Because Momentum is built on my innovations," I said simply. Fletcher nodded slowly. "Here's my problem. Redwood Capital has invested $8 million in Cascade based largely on Daniel's assurances that Momentum represents proprietary technology that would give us a dominant market position. If that technology is actually subject to patent claims by a former employee, our investment thesis falls apart. I'm not trying to destroy Cascade," I said carefully. "I just want fair recognition and compensation for what I created." "What does that look like specifically?" "Acknowledgement that I invented the core technologies. Appropriate financial compensation, either through licensing fees or equity. And honestly, Daniel needs to stop erasing my contributions from the company's story." Fletcher leaned back, studying me. "Daniel has a version of events where you were a talented implementer who executed on his vision for Momentum. He claims the conceptual breakthrough was his and you simply wrote the code." "That's a lie," I said flatly. "Daniel barely understands how the algorithm works. I've sat in meetings where he explained it incorrectly to investors and I had to correct him later. He's taking credit for innovations he's incapable of creating." "Can you prove that?" "I can prove I created them before joining Cascade, which means Daniel definitely didn't create them. I can prove through commit logs and documentation that I designed and implemented every component of the system. And I can prove through email records that Daniel consistently misunderstands the technical details." Fletcher was silent for a long moment. "Ms. Holt, I'm going to be direct with you. This situation is a disaster for Cascade. If your patent claims are valid, we have a founder CEO who misrepresented the ownership of our core technology. That's a breach of his duties to the board and investors. But resolving this requires handling Daniel, which isn't going to be pleasant. What are you proposing? First, you don't sign that separation agreement. Second, we convene an emergency board meeting to address this situation properly. Third, we bring in independent technical and legal experts to evaluate the merits of your claims. And fourth, depending on those findings, we negotiate a resolution that's fair to everyone involved. Including removing Daniel if he continues to misrepresent my work?" Fletcher's expression remained neutral. "The board's responsibility is to protect shareholder value. If Daniel has created legal and reputational risks for the company, we'll address that appropriately." The emergency board meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Daniel had tried to force me out. I wasn't invited to the full meeting, but Felix and Claire accompanied me to Cascade's offices where we waited in a conference room while the board deliberated. Lawrence Fletcher had been thorough. He'd hired an independent technical expert, a professor of computer science from MIT who specialized in machine learning, to review both my prior work and Momentum's implementation. The professor's report, which Felix had obtained a copy of, was devastating for Daniel's narrative. The algorithmic innovations in Momentum's contextual priority mapping system are clearly derived from concepts and implementations present in Ms. Holt's pre-employment work. The blog post dated November 2022 describes the theoretical framework in substantial detail. The notebook entries from October and November 2022 show mathematical formulations that directly correspond to code in Momentum's current codebase. The provisional patent applications, while filed during employment, are based on prior conception and reduction to practice that predates Ms. Holt's hiring at Cascade Technologies. It is this reviewer's professional opinion that Ms. Holt is the principal inventor of Momentum's core innovations, and that these innovations were brought to Cascade rather than developed there. Any claims by company management that these technologies were conceived as part of normal employment duties are not supported by the evidence. After 2 hours, Fletcher emerged and asked us to join a smaller meeting. Just him, another board member named Christina Park from Forge Ventures, and Cascade's corporate attorney, a nervous-looking man named Alan Reed. "Ms. Holt," Fletcher began, "the board has reviewed the evidence and consulted with technical and legal experts. We believe your patent claims have substantial merit. The board is also deeply troubled by representations that were made about the origins of Momentum's core technology. Representations made by Daniel, I said. Fletcher nodded. Yes. Mr. Mercer has insisted that all Momentum technology was developed by Cascade's team under his strategic direction. However, the evidence clearly shows otherwise. The board is particularly concerned that Mr. Mercer may have knowingly misrepresented the IP ownership situation to investors. Christina Park spoke up, her voice crisp and businesslike. We need to resolve this situation quickly and fairly. Our Series B round is scheduled to close next month, and we cannot proceed with potential patent disputes clouding the company's IP position. What would it take to reach an agreement, Ms. Holt? I'd prepared for this question with Felix and Claire's help. 3 things. First, public acknowledgement that I'm the principal inventor of Momentum's contextual priority mapping system. Not just internal recognition but in the company's investor materials, website and any future publicity. Second, equity compensation reflecting my contributions. I'm thinking 5% of the company with full voting rights. Third, a formal licensing agreement for my patents with reasonable royalties and my involvement in any future development of the core technologies. Christina whistled softly. 5% is substantial for a non-founder. I'm not a non-founder, I corrected. I'm the person who built the technology that makes Cascade valuable. Daniel may have founded the company, but I founded the product. Fletcher and Christina exchanged glances. The corporate attorney, Alan, cleared his throat nervously. Ms. Holt's demands aren't unreasonable given the IP situation. If we went to litigation, a court might well find that she has ownership claims over the core technology. At that point, we'd be looking at either massive licensing fees or having to rebuild Momentum from scratch, which would destroy the company's valuation. What about Daniel? I asked. Is he going to accept this? Fletcher's expression hardened. Mr. Mercer is facing a board review of his conduct. Misrepresenting IP ownership to investors is a serious breach of fiduciary duty. His future with the company is under discussion. The negotiations took another week with lawyers from both sides hammering out details. The final agreement included formal recognition of me as principal inventor of Momentum's core algorithms, to be included in all company materials. 6% equity in Cascade Technologies with full voting rights and standard founder-level vesting. A licensing agreement for my patents with a one-time payment of $250,000 plus ongoing royalties of 2% of revenue attributable to the patented technologies. My reinstatement as head of machine learning architecture, reporting directly to the board rather than to product management. Daniel's removal as CEO, effective immediately with a transition to a board advisor role. The news broke internally on a Monday morning. Lawrence Fletcher sent a company-wide email explaining that Daniel Mercer was stepping down as CEO to pursue other opportunities, and that the board was conducting a search for new leadership. A separate technical team email sent by Elliot announced that I was returning to the company in an expanded role leading all machine learning initiatives. The reactions were mixed. Some colleagues who'd been close to Daniel were clearly upset, viewing my reinstatement as a hostile takeover. But others, particularly the engineers who'd worked directly with me, were quietly supportive. Several people stopped by my desk that first day back to say they were glad I'd returned. Sophia Crane resigned within 48 hours, apparently unwilling to work in a company where she'd lost her executive sponsor. The 2 machine learning engineers she'd hired left with her, which was fine. I'd never trusted them anyway.